my paper, in my paper I attempt to analyze an intersection between a critique of traditional gender identities and a critique of capitalism, or better said, of a neoliberal society. There are different accounts of neoliberalism. Those accounts I'm drawing upon in this paper are those identifying the privatization of public debt as the main process of neoliberalism. This process of privatization can be, again, investigated from different perspectives. It could be investigated from a proper political economic perspective, which describes privatization mainly as a shift of public expenditures burdens from the state onto individuals, which goes along with what Ilaria explained yesterday with the exploitation of reproductive labor. But then there's another perspective, which is the one I am adopting here, which is a more broader social existential perspective, I would call it, which investigates the indebted condition as a form of life. As Jean-François said yesterday, as a form of life, so indebtedness as a form of life means that there's no distinction anymore between the person and the debt. So, and I intend to investigate a particular sense in which we can think of this in distinction between life, individual's life, but also collective life, and economic, debt economics, by concentrating on intimate love relationships and more precisely on parenting or mothering relationships. By taking into account Melanie Klein's theory, I try to shed some lights on what Judith Butler could call, or would call the psychic life of debt. And I'm doing that because I think that this is a good way to disclose the gender dimension of debt credit. And my thesis, or better said, my hypothesis here is that the current debt regime is taking on, capitalizing, assuming, and also strengthening traditional gender identities. I think that the starting point for understanding how present-day neoliberal societies build up gender identities in a way that reproduces, bolsters, and boosts the traditional binary, so the traditional distinction between a woman identity and a man identity, is to be found in the subjectivation theory of debt. As it is well known, Maurizio Lazzarato has worked on this theory by genealogically examining the social factory, the fabrica, producing the pivotal and prevailing mode of neoliberal subjectivity, namely that of the indebted man. Subjectivation corresponds to a bundle of practices, strategies, techniques, dispositives, axiomatics that mold and govern, often through violent means, indebted human beings. I won't reconstruct Maurizio Lazzarato's thesis, also because we have heard from him yesterday. I only want to focus on this thesis by Lazzarato, which is that the debt-credit bond, the social bond of debt and credit, is a universal power relation, which works only on the basis of a specific subjective psychological and moral response, which is bad conscience or guilt. And in order to draw this genealogy of debt and credit, Lazzarato draws upon the second section of Nietzsche's genealogy of morals, where Nietzsche argues or shows how the central moral concept of guilt, moral and psychological concept of guilt, in German Schuld, has its roots in the very material concept of death, which in German is Schuld as well. I go a little more in details about Nietzsche's theory because there are some interesting parallels between Nietzsche's idea, the analogy of death and guilt, and Melanie Klein's conception of guilt. So the feeling of guilt as both expression of the subconscious and as a moral feeling is, according to Nietzsche, not an innate fact of human psychology, but rather a social historical construction. In his words, the product of a long history and series of transformations, end quote. More precisely, individual guilt is the result of a process of internalization of violence. Instead of exercising violence against fellow human beings, violence is exercised against oneself as punishment for the desire, the imagination, and the possibility of violent deeds. Self-punishment is not a psychological innate mechanism, but the way in which the will to power is expressed and diverted in societies that have difficulties to deal with, to cope with, at least some forms of violence, and have therefore banned them. In societies that do not know the feeling of guilt, let's say, to put it simply, aristocratic societies, so in these societies, Schuld, in the sense of death, was refers to every damage or injury one could inflict to another, both physically or economically. According to this original form of death relation, when one inflicts some kind of pain on or takes away something from someone else, she becomes indebted to the damaged person. This person who has been injured, the creditor, will then simply demand some kind of pain in return. So in this kind of original debt relationship, it's kind of easy to reciprocate violence and also to establish, in a certain sense, equality. Schuld is internalized as feeling of guilt insofar as the pain is not inflicted by the creditor, but self-inflicted by the debtor herself. As resulting in self-punishment and being continuously fed by guilt, that becomes almost impossible to extinguish. Being that owing something to someone else becomes a human condition, a sort of naturalized constituent of human subjectivity. So, as you know, Lazzarato relies on this Nietzschean genealogy in order to explain how the debt regime in neoliberalism works. I won't expand on that now. I only want to underline that, or say that Lazzarato doesn't. So he speaks only of indebted man without differentiating between gender identities, and I think though that we could further investigate the subjectivation processes also from a gender perspective. So, and ask ourselves what's the role of women identity and how exactly the making of indebted woman. What's the function? What's the role of the making of the indebted woman, if any, in the debt regime? My hypothesis is that the traditional woman identity, which is characterized, as I will hopefully explain a little bit later, which is characterized by strong attitudes of care, taking care of the others, and also caring for the dependence relation with the other, upholds a specific relevant position in neoliberal societies. So the woman identity functions in a way as a sort of custodian of that guilt relationships. And here I am arguing against Nancy Fraser, who has famously claimed that neoliberalism has partially changed traditional gender identities. And I think it's not true, and I think that neoliberalism is capitalizing on, is relying on strongly traditional gender identities and on the traditional gender binary. So now I would like to show how Melanie Klein's theory of the primary relationship, so of the relationship between a mother and child, can offer an interesting contribute in this kind of subjectivation theory and in the debt credit guilt debates. So, according to Melanie Klein, the parenting relationship, the relationship between traditionally mother and child, is constituted by an entanglement between love and hate. So love, which springs out of the dependence bond between mother and child, corresponds more or less to the satisfaction, rises from and also corresponds in a way to the satisfaction and fulfillment of needs and of the baby's needs, of the child's needs and desires. This love relationship, this dependence relationship, is so strong that that becomes frightening for the toddler, for the baby. So the baby fears, develops a strong anxiety out of this love and dependence, and thus he develops strong feelings of hate, which turn into aggressive fantasies, so destruction fantasies that have to be perpetrated against the mother's or the caregiver's body. So these destruction fantasies, these aggressive fantasies, serve the purpose of becoming independent from the frightening, intense love and dependence relationship. Of course, though, the aggressiveness, the destruction fantasies do not break the love relationship. Of course, the mother-child relationship is still there. So, because of that, the destructive fantasies give rise to strong feelings of guilt for having destroyed in the child's mind the mother's body. And these guilt feelings, again, give rise to reparation drives. So since the love relationship is still there, since the attachment between the mother and the child is still there, after having hurt and destroyed in the fantasies the child wants to preserve, to repair or revive the loved object, to heal the mother, to recover a good positive relationship with her. Two things maybe are important to note, to remark at this point. The first one is that there seems to me that there's a certain parallel with Nietzsche's idea of the original violent death relationships. So following Nietzsche's idea of the original material death, the enduring damaging acts the child perpetrates against the beloved caregiver can be seen as establishing a death relation between them. The second thing to notice is that so Melanie Klein's image figure of the child-mother relationships is a paradox, a dialectical one, because so it's a circular one. So it's a circle in the sense that the extinction of guilt generates further motives of guilt and reparations, re-establish the love and the dependence, which again gives rise to fear, anxiety, thus guilt, thus reparations, drives, and so on and so forth. And this circle or paradox character of guilt lines up with the paradox or the circular character of debt relationships in financialized in neoliberal capitalism, and thus to the fact that debts have to be continuously incentivized and incurred, even though indebted individuals are continuously blamed. On the Kleinian account, though, and this is why I think the Melanie Klein's contribution could be interesting here, is that this circular character, this paradox, is not a vicious and oppressive, repressive circle. In fact, the never-ending cycles of damage, debt, guilt, reparation have a creative and transformative potential. In Klein's view, the reparative impulse, so the reparation drives, play a major role within the psyche, and this reparation drive, this desire for reparation, for re-establish the good relationship with the mother, can be seen as the unconscious desire that many creative achievements symbolically fulfill. So this debt-guilt relationship, in a way, is what makes the relationship going on and transform both the child and, in some sense, the mother as well. I won't go into details here, but one can make an argument that shows that even though Melanie Klein basically describes this process from the perspective of the child, it can be so. One has to argue that love, hate, guilt, desires for reparation are not only felt by the child, by the toddler, but also by the parents, both mothers and fathers. So it's a kind of reciprocal relation. Everyone involved in the love relationship has feelings of guilt, is in love, hates, develops aggressive fantasies, and so on. So I've said that by Melanie Klein, according to Melanie Klein, the guilt-debt relationship has a transformative, creative character. So it's a positive debt in a certain sense. But there's a condition in order for the debt-guilt relation to be a good one, a creative and a transformative one. And the condition is that the guilt shouldn't be too strong, shouldn't be too intense. So too much guilt is problematic for the relationship. So it blocks, too much guilt, excessive guilt blocks the transformative character of the relationships. It prevents the potential, the transformative and creative potential to unfold. And here is why, interestingly enough, the gender discourse kicks in. Also in Melanie Klein's theory, even though she doesn't explicitly develop it from a gender or from a feminist perspective, you can see how she describes the different effects of over-indebtedness, of excessive guilt on mothers, women, and on fathers. Because she says that the effects of too much guilt, on too intense guilt on the mothers, is that she ends up identifying herself too tightly with the child, and this generates an entirely self-sacrificing attitude. So when a mother is or feels herself so has a self-understanding as if she couldn't free herself from this excessive guilt, she becomes an engulfing, suffocating mother who blocks in a way the development of the child, and also who sacrifices herself for the sake of the relationship. On the other end, men, fathers, tend to break, when they feel too much guilt, they tend to break the relationship, to cut the dependence bond and separating themselves and focusing on only their individual achievement of independency, to put it bluntly and roughly. So, to sum up, too much guilt or debt pushes women to strengthen their dependence bond, to sacrifice themselves in a way that tend to block the other's development and to pervert the relationship, intensifying hate and equating love with over-dependence. On the other hand, too much guilt or debt pushes men to violently break the dependence bond, to distance from others, and to dry out the sources of reparation, creativity, and transformation. And this different response to excessive guilt complies, interestingly enough, with a traditional characterization of gender identities. So one could, when it has been done, one can define the woman identity, so the woman identity's defining traits, as those revolving around the capacity and the willingness to care about others, to put the other's needs, desires, goals and projects ahead, to take one's own needs, desires, goals and projects as subordinated to the other and as a function to the others. On the other hand, the man identity's defining traits revolve around the capacity and willingness to focus on achieving and exercising one's own independence and autonomy. On the basis of Melanie Klein's account, we can claim that both dependence and independence, so both defining traits of men and women, constitute crucial components of our intimate human relations. We need others, namely we are dependent on others for the fulfillment of needs and desires of every kind, and at the same time we need to separate ourselves from others, to affirm a certain independence in order to adequately cope with our vulnerability and fears. The entanglement between dependence and independence, as well as between love and aggressiveness, guilt and reparation, provides for a good social relationships. I've spoken about love relationships, but we could, I think, generalize this claim. And I've argued, so I very briefly sketched out that a positive social relationship is a fulfilling, creative, and transformative one. So, how these traditional gender dichotomies, so this distinction between a woman identity which focuses on dependence and care, and man identity who focuses on independence and breaks the dependence bond, how these traditional gender identities work in the present day debt regime. So the process of privatization of debt has given rise to unbearable debts that are perceived and presented and experienced as unbearable. Of course, there are a lot of examples. The most obvious examples are that the financial crisis in 2008 was triggered by American citizens not being able to pay their mortgages, and also in this summer 2015, the European Union has been endangered by Greece not being able to pay its excessive debts. So a form of life in which debt and guilt are excessively burdensome provides fertile soil for the traditional woman identity to thrive. And this would be my hypothesis, so that the making of the indebted woman does not consist, in fact, in the emergence of a new form of subjectivity, of female subjectivity, but rather in the consolidation and further flourishing of the traditional one, women's propensity for dependence, care, and self-sacrifice, sacrifice for the of their independence, finds a sort of new social legitimation because such traditional female attitudes become particularly useful for dealing with death's feelings of guilt. On the basis of their identity, women appear as particularly fit for what we can call death guilt labor, which is a variety of reproductive labor or care labor or dependence labor, as was called by other feminists. Death guilt labor consists in, for example, taking on responsibilities for incurred death, dealing with the guilt without fleeing from it, so assuming the death and the guilt and working with it in a way, but also coming up with sometimes creative solution for paying debts off, like for doing these reparations. Women are both able to bear the feelings of guilt without too much rebelling against it, and at the same time to do whatever it takes to attenuate it. So this is, well, the hypothesis, which is at this stage, I think, of my research, still a kind of intuition, and then I have a conclusion about the possibility of reverse and or to analyze the critical potential of this of the traditional gender identities or woman identities on the basis of Melanie Klein's theory, but I think I would let it maybe for the discussion.
Good.